Okay, let's talk space threats. And maybe forget the big Hollywood explosions for a minute.
Yeah, definitely. Because the real stuff happening up there, it's much more subtle, but still really, really concerning.
Right, like positioning and interference, that kind of thing.
Exactly. It's this constant chess game, always the shadow of weaponized tech hanging over it all.
So to really get a handle on this, we're diving into the Space Threat Assessment 2025 report from CSIS.
A really solid piece of work.
Think of this as your quick intelligence brief. Everything you need to know, basically, about space security right now.
And it's built on a ton of open source info. They've been tracking this stuff for 8 years, foreign counterspace weapons specifically.
And you know what's interesting? The past year, we haven't seen those big headline-grabbing kinetic ASIS tests.
No, thankfully. But that silence, it definitely doesn't mean peace is broken out.
Not at all.
Beneath the surface, there's actually quite a lot going on. Significant developments, maybe even more worrying in some ways.
That's exactly what we want to unpack today. Our mission, if you like, is to cut through all that complexity.
Yeah, get to the core insights.
We're going to look at these subtle but really critical trends, counterspace capabilities, how satellites are moving around up there.
And just the steady creep towards, well, weaponization of space.
So the report gives us a good framework. It talks about 4 main types of counterspace weapons.
That's right. Kinetic, non-kinetic, electronic weapons, and cyber operations. Helps to break it down.
Okay, let's tackle kinetic first. That's physical force, right? Smashing into things.
Pretty much. Physical force to destroy or damage. The obvious one is that direct ascent, or DA, anti-satellite missile, launched from the ground.
And the big problem there, aside from destroying the target, is the debris, isn't it?
Huge problem. Creates thousands of pieces, potentially. Long-lasting stuff that can make whole orbits unusable for years, decades even.
Wow. But kinetic isn't just missiles.
No, it also includes things like satellites maybe attacking each other with projectiles, maybe. Or even physically grappling another satellite.
Like a space tow truck from hell.
Sort of, yeah. And don't forget, attacking the ground infrastructure, the control stations, the communication links. That's kinetic too, in a sense.
Got it. Okay, next up, non-kinetic.
So this is about radiated energy, using energy beams, basically, to interfere, damage, or destroy.
Like lasers, microwaves, that sort of thing.
Exactly. Directed energy weapons. And with lasers, even the ones just meant to temporarily blind sensors, they call them dazzlers.
Yeah.
There's always a risk they could cause unintentional permanent damage.
Right. And this category also includes nuclear detonations.
Yes, specifically the effects. The electromagnetic pulse, the EMP, and the radiation.
EMP, that's like a giant electrical surge frying electronics.
Precisely. Could take out unprotected systems over a huge area, satellites in space, maybe even stuff on the ground.
Okay. Then there's electronic weapons. How are they different?
Electronic weapons focus on the electromagnetic spectrum. Radio waves, basically. The goal is usually temporary to deny or interfere with services.
So jamming GPS. Satellite communication.
That's the classic example, yeah. Jamming or spoofing.
Spoofing. Sending fake signals, right? Making a GPS receiver think it's somewhere else.
Exactly. It's a really sneaky tactic. This category also covers jamming things like space-based radar or just generally messing with the radio signals satellites use to talk to Earth.
Right. And the last one, cyber.
Cyber operations. So offensive hacking, essentially. Targeting any part of a space system.
Ground control, networks, the satellites themselves.
All of the above. And the intent can be all over the place. Destruction, disabling systems disruption, or just spying, espionage.
And the report says these often start by finding weak spots in networks.
Yeah, network exploitation is often the way in. And sometimes you don't know immediately what the attacker is ultimately trying to achieve. It can be ambiguous.
Now, something that links all these together. The report stresses how much they depend on space situational awareness, SSA.
Absolutely critical. And intelligence gathering, too. You can't target what you can't find or track.
So you need to know what's up there, where it is, what it's doing.
How it's moving, what its patterns are. And you need to be able to check if your attack actually worked. All relies on good SSA and intel from ground sensors and space sensors.
Okay. To make this more concrete, the report has this table, doesn't it? Showing who's got what.
Yeah, it's really useful. Summarizes the capabilities of China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. As of March 2025, across those 4 categories we just talked about.
Gives you a snapshot of their focus, their different strategies.
Exactly, where they're putting their efforts.
Okay, let's talk about China then. The report really emphasizes their growing military focus on space.
Definitely. It's not just talk. You see it in how their operators are getting better, their tactics maturing.
And that big reorganization, creating the PLA Aerospace Force.
Yeah, that really signals how central space is becoming to their military thinking. Managing all space capabilities, including counterspace stuff, under one roof.
And this is where it gets, well, frankly, a bit skooky. These highly maneuverable Chinese satellites.
In both LEO and GEO. Low Earth orbit and geostationary.
And they're not just making tiny tweaks. These are big moves.
Serious maneuvering, which the report suggests could well be them building up an on-orbit counterspace arsenal, testing things out.
Can you give us some examples? Because the report listed quite a few.
Sure. There was TJS-2 in GEO, December 2024. It moved at like 44 meters per second. That's fast for GEO repositioning. Burns a lot of fuel.
Way beyond normal station keeping.
Way beyond. Then TJS-4, same time frame, positioned itself right between a U.S. surveillance satellite and the sun.
Trying to blind it.
Looks like it. A deliberate maneuver. And maybe most pointedly, TJS-10 got within just 25 kilometers of another Chinese satellite, TJS-3, back in May 2024.
That's really close in space terms, especially GEO.
Very close. Close enough for, well, various types of interaction, not necessarily friendly ones. It really shows agility, the ability to put something exactly where you want it, quickly and maybe unexpectedly.
So it's not just having satellites, it's having nimble satellites.
Exactly. And those GEO examples are definitely raising flags. But it's happening in LEO, too.
Right. The Shenlong spaceplane.
Yeah.
Releasing something, maybe grabbing it again.
Yeah, between May and September last year. That's not typical science.
Definitely not.
And then you had those SY-24C satellites doing these weird corkscrew maneuvers around another satellite in January 2024.
Corkscrew maneuvers.
Yeah. But the big one was maybe March, April 2024. SY-24C03 and another satellite, SJ605A, very close rendezvous, within a kilometer.
And someone from Space Force called it.
Dogfighting. Yeah, just this past March, a Space Force official actually used the term dogfighting to describe it.
Wow. Dogfighting in space. That really shifts the perspective, doesn't it? Suggests active competition up there.
It certainly does. And there's more. China's SJ-25 launch, January 2025, officially for testing fuel replenishment.
Right.
But it moved into the same orbital area as SJ-21. That's the satellite that famously grappled and moved a dead Chinese navigation satellite a while back.
So refueling SJ-21.
Yeah.
To enable more grabbing.
It definitely raises that possibility, supporting more aggressive on-orbit stuff. And we also saw the SY-12 satellites drifting across GEO, then turning around. Like they're patrolling or surveying the whole belt.
And China isn't just doing this stuff. They're watching who's watching, right?
Oh, yeah. Very focused on U.S. space-based SSA. That KTKAI report from September 24, it showed Chinese researchers publishing studies on the movements of specific U.S. GSSAP surveillance satellites.
Because they're meticulously tracking the trackers.
Precisely. Using their own systems, relying on networks like ISA, even public data. They're piecing it together.
And the report suggests they might start talking about this more publicly to counter U.S. criticism.
Seems likely. Pointing out observed GSSAP behavior to say, hey, you do similar things. Like when their SJ-23 didn't move away from a U.S. satellite late last year, almost daring the U.S. to comment.
Okay, what about cyber and electronic warfare from China?
The report notes, fewer new public reports specifically linked to China in the last year compared to maybe previous years.
But that doesn't mean they're not capable.
Absolutely not. Concerns are still high about groups like Salt Typhoon, and we learned more about Volt Typhoon targeting satellite services, plus targeting defense supply chains in Taiwan.
And jamming and spoofing.
Again, not a flood of new reports attributing it directly to China recently, but based on past evidence, they undoubtedly have advanced EW capabilities they could use against space systems or ground networks.
And that PLA Aerospace Force reorganization ties it all together.
Right. It integrates everything, kinetic, non-kinetic, EW, cyber, under one command structure focused on space dominance.
And they're researching relevant tech, too, even if it's not labeled counterspace.
Yeah, Chinese scientists are publishing papers on things like high-powered microwave, lasers, military tech with clear potential space applications.
Finally, on China Starlink, they see it as a threat.
They definitely seem to. They're analyzing its military implications, its link to the U.S. government, its use in Ukraine.
Do they maybe overestimate how integrated it is with the DoD?
The report suggests they might, yeah, but their core worry seems real. These big constellations, like Starlink, could make their existing counterspace weapons less effective, harder to take down thousands of satellites than just a few big ones.
And those AI simulations we heard about early this year, attacks on Starlink.
Right. A Nanjing University study, and they have defense ties suggesting, maybe 99 Chinese satellites with directed energy could disrupt 1,400 Starlink satellites. Shows they're actively thinking about how to counter these systems.
Okay, let's pivot to Russia. The report kicks off with some pretty provocative stuff there, too.
Yeah, top of the list is the ongoing concern about this alleged nuclear space-based AS weapon. That news first broke back in February 2024.
A nuclear weapon designed to be used in space against satellites. That's huge.
Potentially treaty-breaking, destabilizing, massive implications if it's real and deployed.
And didn't the U.S. accuse them of launching a conventional counterspace weapon more recently?
They did, May 2024. Cosmos 2576. Launched into basically the same orbital plane as a U.S. government satellite, USA 314.
That sounds deliberate.
Washington certainly thought so. It raised major alarms. It did change orbit later in February 2025, but that initial placement was seen as a clear signal, a potential weapon deployment.
And more launches followed.
Yep. February 2025, Cosmos 2581, 2582, and 2583 went up, and then 2581 and 2582 were seen flying in formation, really close, like 100 meters apart in March 2025.
That close. It takes skill and suggests coordination.
Definitely. And 2583 also made a close pass. Plus, we still have Cosmos 2558 shadowing USA 326 since August 2022. U.S. Space Force flat out calls that one a counterspace weapon.
So a pattern of potentially threatening orbital behavior.
A clear pattern. And then there are the Luch satellites. Or Olymp, same thing.
Still prowling around GEO, near communication satellites.
Still at it. The report lists several they've sidled up to since the last assessment: Eutelsat Connect, Astra 4A, Thor 7, Intelsat satellites.
What are they doing? Just listening in.
That's the main suspicion. Signals intelligence. And there might even be a link between Luch, Olymp 2 being near Astra 4A, and the jamming that hit Ukrainian TV broadcasts from that satellite.
So surveillance possibly combined with electronic attack.
It's a disturbing possibility. And Luch Olymp 1 was also seen moving around in GEO recently, March 2025.
Okay, let's circle back to that alleged nuclear attack. That sounds like the most alarming development.
It really is. The initial reports in Feb 24 set off alarm bells. U.S. officials worried about violating the Outer Space Treaty.
Russia denied it, of course.
Vehemently. But the U.S. pushed it at the UN Security Council, tried to get a resolution passed reaffirming the treaty's ban on nukes in orbit.
Russia vetoed that.
Russia vetoed, China abstained. Then Russia and China proposed their own counter-resolution, which the U.S. opposed. So, diplomatic deadlock.
But the U.S. shared some details about what this weapon might be.
Yeah, they suggested it's designed for LEO, low Earth orbit, and could disable or destroy potentially hundreds, maybe thousands of satellites using EMP and radiation effects.
A weapon of mass disruption in space.
Pretty much. And they linked it to this supposed scientific satellite, Cosmos 2553, launched February 2022 into a weird high radiation orbit.
Officially to test components in radiation.
That was the stated mission. But the U.S. implied it was related to the nuclear ASAT program. Even if it carried a dummy warhead, the U.S. warned the effects of a real one would be indiscriminate,
rendering LEO unusable
for potentially a long time. Though, interestingly, Cosmos 2553 seems to have stopped working. It was reportedly tumbling from around mid-November 2024.
Adding more uncertainty. Okay, beyond orbit, Russia's still very active with GPS jamming and spoofing on the ground.
Very active, and the problem seems to be spreading. Baltic Sea, Nordic countries, Ukraine, inside Russia itself, the Black Sea.
Seeing a surge in the Baltics and Nordic areas.
Big time. Finland's tracking agency, Traficom, reported a major increase in incidents. It seems widespread.
And they're using it defensively inside Russia, too.
Yeah.
Against Ukrainian drones.
Appears so. GPS interference popping up in Russia, coinciding with Ukrainian attacks. They've also hit Ukrainian TV satellite signals. Amos, Eutelsat Hotbird.
Leading to complaints.
Yeah, European countries took it to the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, in June 2024. We even saw a UK military plane have GPS and comms jammed near Kaliningrad in March 24.
And they're trying to counter Starlink, too.
Seems like it. Developing this Kalenka system apparently defines Starlink user terminals on the ground.
And they've made threats against private companies helping the U.S. military.
Explicit threats. A Russian official basically said in March 2024 that commercial assets supporting adversaries are legitimate targets. They've complained at the UN, too, about military use of civilian space infrastructure.
Right. Okay, let's look beyond the big two. Iran. What's the assessment there?
Iran's definitely showing increased skill in space launch, several successes in 2024.
Including that launch with the Semen-1 space tug.
Yeah, December 2024. That tug tech is interesting. It allows maneuvering payloads in orbit. Obvious dual-use potential for counterspace. Plus, Russia launched some Iranian remote sensing satellites late last year.
And cyber activity from Iran.
Still active. The report mentions specific campaigns like Peach Sandstorm, linked to the IRGC targeting aerospace and satellite companies. Broader espionage against defense sectors, too.
What about North Korea? They had a launch failure, right?
They did. May 2024, trying to orbit a spy satellite. Failed. But their first one, Malyung-1, is apparently still up there and maneuvering.
And still testing missiles.
Yep. Ballistic hypersonic tests reported. South Korea is also worried about ongoing North Korean GPS jamming.
And the Russia connection.
U.S. warned in January 2025 that Russia might be sharing advanced space tech with Pyongyang, plus ongoing cyber espionage from North Korean groups targeting defense and aerospace worldwide.
Okay, how about India?
India had a notable success with their SpaceX mission, Space Docking Experiment, January 2025.
Showcasing rendezvous and docking.
Exactly. RPO, rendezvous and proximity operations and docking. Key capabilities for advanced stuff, including potential counterspace applications down the line. Also reports they might be talking to Russia about buying missile warning radar.
Israel. We mostly hear about Iron Dome, but what about space?
Well, they've massively ramped up GPS jamming and spoofing in the Eastern Mediterranean, especially around April 2024, almost certainly defensive against missile and drone threats from Iran and its proxies.
Directed energy, Iron Beam.
They continue developing Iron Beam, and any powerful directed energy weapon has a latent ASAT capability. They also likely had a successful exo-atmospheric missile intercept in November 2024, hitting something above the atmosphere.
And finally, Europe, France and Germany.
They've been more public about counterspace initiatives, developing inspection satellites, SDA satellites, exploring ways to protect their own assets, maybe using lasers or other non-kinetic means.
France has the Tutatis program.
Right. LISA-1 for SDA, Splinter as a maneuverable LEO satellite. Germany's working on an inspector satellite with robotic arms, so building capabilities, some potentially defensive, some maybe more.
Okay. The report then dives deeper into some key trends. First is that GPS jamming and spoofing we mentioned.
Yeah, it really highlights how this has exploded globally. Baltic, Eastern Europe, Middle East, South Asia. It's not just a niche military tactic anymore.
Affecting civilian life, aviation, shipping.
Big time. Real risks to public safety, but also it's proving its military worth. Denying GPS-guided weapons, helping air defense systems. We see Israel, Ukraine, Russia all integrating it.
And it's being tracked using public data. AIS, ADSB.
Yeah, combining that with official reports like NOTAMs. The contrast with just 5 years ago is stark. It used to be rare, localized incidents. Now it's persistent and widespread.
Clearly linked to conflicts in Ukraine and Gaza.
Absolutely. Big surges in activity coinciding with major events in those conflicts. And diplomatic pressure hasn't really stopped it.
The second deep dive is on cyber attacks. The drip, as they call it.
Right, because it's constant, but often hard to track definitively. Attacks happen, but motivations, objectives, even attribution can be really murky.
And victims don't always report it.
Exactly. Plus, hacker groups might exaggerate claims. It's tough to get solid numbers.
So different tracking groups report different figures.
Yeah, ERCI might report a few specific space sector attacks, while Space ISAC sees hundreds of weekly incidents targeting related infrastructure, including attempted intrusions. An ETH Zurich report counted over 120 cyber ops related to Ukraine targeting the space sector, mostly DDoS.
But the focus seems to be on ground systems, not satellites themselves.
Based on recent public reports, yes. Attacks on ground control, terminals, companies. Fewer confirmed cases of actually hacking spacecraft in orbit being publicly detailed recently.
Okay, third area. Rendezvous and proximity operations, or RPOs.
The Nebula.
Or
cruel intentions, yeah. Because more satellites are doing close approaches. For legitimate things like servicing, maybe debris removal, that industry is growing.
But the same maneuvers could be used aggressively.
Exactly. Is that satellite coming close to inspect? Or to disable? or to practice disabling, it's ambiguous.
And the U.S. worries about Chinese and Russian satellites shadowing theirs.
Just like China and Russia worry about U.S. GSSAP satellites, it's mutual suspicion fueled by ambiguity and a lack of trust. Transparency could help, but not likely right now.
So Space Force is trying to get better at figuring out what's going on.
Building up space intelligence, yeah. Commercial companies are also developing tools to characterize maneuvers. The report stresses, though, don't automatically call surveillance satellites weapons, but RPOs without clear, peaceful intent. Those are potential threats.
Especially that dogfighting behavior.
It definitely crosses a line in perception.
Fourth, featured analysis. Unintentional space debris, the stuff breaking up that wasn't deliberately shot.
Yeah, this is a huge, often underreported problem. Old satellites spent rocket stages just falling apart in orbit.
And this poses risks just like ASAT debris could cause diplomatic incidents.
Absolutely. If debris from one country hits another satellite, big problems. And the official tracking of these events is inconsistent.
U.S. Basecom doesn't announce them all. Commercial trackers see more.
Often, yeah. The report details 8 specific events in the past year or so. Russian Razuz satellite, Chinese Long March upper stage, a couple of U.S. upper stages, and Intelsat. Lots of debris generated.
But the official cataloging on SpaceTrack lags behind. Or misses fragments.
Significant discrepancy sometimes. Hundreds of fragments tracked by commercial firms, maybe only a handful or none initially, in the official public catalog. This inconsistency isn't great for U.S. credibility on space safety norms.
And the point is, these accidental breakups are just as dangerous for the space environment as weapons use.
Exactly. They're like ticking time bombs littering orbit.
Okay, final featured analysis. The collision of commercial and counterspace.
Yeah, this blurring of lines. Commercial companies providing vital services, even in wartime like Ukraine, governments encouraging it, NATO's even writing a commercial space strategy.
But it puts those companies in the crosshairs, like that Russian threat.
Precisely. And commercial companies are now developing tech with obvious dual-use potential.
Like that French company, Dark, wanting to build a space armory. An interceptor.
Yeah, described as a SWAT team of space for moving satellites or debris. But the tech could easily be used offensively. Same with on-orbit servicing robots, debris removal nets, or harpoons.
So, helpful tech that could also be weaponized. Creates tricky entanglements.
Very delicate balance. Commercial innovation is great, but it's getting tangled up in these security concerns.
All right, shifting to the what to watch section. First point, distinguishing peacetime norms from wartime actions.
Right. The U.S. pushes responsible behavior tenets, the ASAT test ban. But how do these apply in actual conflict? It's less clear.
Are the rules different in war?
Well, the fundamental laws of armed conflict still apply, protecting non-combatants, etc. But space operations might seem less likely to directly harm civilians than, say, bombing a city. The report suggests maybe a space version of the old incidents at sea agreement.
To prevent peacetime miscalculations from escalating.
Exactly. Establish rules of the road for normal times, acknowledging that wartime is different and governed by broader laws of war could help stability.
Second thing to watch. Will the U.S. become more public about its own counterspace weapons?
Historically, they've been very quiet, mostly just acknowledging some EW systems, framing them defensively.
Unlike France or Germany, who are more open.
Yeah. The report argues maybe revealing more, not everything, but more could boost deterrence and, crucially, help partnerships with commercial innovators working on relevant tech, like servicing hypersonics.
Because the secrecy makes it hard for the military to work with startups.
Can do, yeah. Opening up a bit might help bridge that gap.
Third area, bodyguard satellites. Is this becoming a real trend?
Well, China has demonstrated the capability for complex RPOs, tracking even non-cooperative capture with SJ-21. That looks a lot like the building blocks for sophisticated on-orbit weapons.
And France is actively pushing for bodyguards. Europe funding research.
Yes. France has been consistent. The EU is funding concepts involving threat detection, maybe even neutralization with robots or lasers on board a satellite.
But will this just lead to an arms race? China and Russia developing countermeasures?
Very likely. Escalating costs, more complex threats, plus tricky legal questions if commercial operators start deploying their own defensive systems. The report suggests the U.S. probably needs on-orbit protection tech now, maybe both non-kinetic and kinetic, and shouldn't necessarily keep it secret.
Fourth point, the debris generation again, but focusing on the source.
Yeah, reinforcing that most recent debris isn't from P-LEO constellations breaking up or new ASAT tests. It's old satellites and rocket bodies. 7 of the 8 events in the report fit that mold.
Especially risky around 800-kilometer altitude.
Yes, debris there can stay up for over a century. These old objects are the main problem right now, the ticking time bombs. But there's not enough action to deal with them.
And they pose a similar risk to deliberate attacks on the environment.
Absolutely, we need to address that source.
Fifth, countering those proliferated LEO constellations, like Starlink.
Russia's alleged nuclear ASAT could be seen as one extreme answer to that problem, because PLEO offers big advantages: resilience, coverage, lower cost. Ukraine showed that.
So adversaries will try to counter them, like those Chinese simulations. Cyber attacks.
Definitely. Expect more counter-PLEO threats, maybe high-altitude nuclear detonations, hand effects. Moscow's already drawing red lines about commercial support for military ops.
But the U.S. needs ways to defend its constellations without creating massive debris fields itself.
That's the challenge. Proliferation helps resilience, but it's not the whole answer. You need deterrence and defense that don't trash the orbit for everyone, unlike the approaches maybe hinted at by Russia and China.
Finally, the sixth thing to watch. The space and missile defense connection.
Yeah, initiatives like the U.S. Golden Dome concept, announced Jan 2025. Space is becoming absolutely central for missile defense sensors, data relay.
And maybe space-based interceptors, SBIs, making a comeback.
Renewed interest, yeah. Though history suggests you'd need thousands in LEO for effective boost phase intercept, but those SBIs would instantly become prime counterspace targets.
Russia already complains it's destabilizing.
They do. Argue it undermines deterrence, could push them towards things like nuclear ASATs. And SBIs themselves are inherently dual use.
And they could be used as counterspace weapons. Bodyguards, degrading enemy systems.
Absolutely. It could really unlock space for broader warfighting roles in, from, and through space. A major shift.
So wrapping this all up, no single Big Bang event in the last year, but the CSIS report shows a lot of worrying undercurrents.
Definitely. No quiet breakthroughs, maybe, but consistent concerning trends. China and Russia actively testing tech, refining concepts with clear counterspace uses. Iran and North Korea making incremental progress, too.
And GPS jamming is basically normalized in conflict zones now. Cyber attacks are just constant background noise.
Yeah, those are almost the new normal, unfortunately. And we see this contrast, limited public info on U.S. capabilities versus adversaries, though France is an exception.
Suggesting the U.S. might be rethinking things. Old assumptions about kinetic weapons, maybe even space-based interceptors with Golden Dome.
Seems like a reevaluation might be happening, because the report leaves you with a clear picture. Russia, and especially China, are showing real sophistication in orbit. Alongside their cyber and EW, Iran's getting better too.
While the U.S. is maybe held back a bit historically.
Its approach looks like it's evolving now. The report strongly implies the U.S. needs the full toolkit. Bodyguard satellites, maybe being more public about its arsenal for deterrence.
Because space is undeniably becoming more contested, more threatening.
Absolutely. And it forces you to think about that future, doesn't it? Where conflict really does extend fully into space. What does that mean for everyone? A sobering thought.